A very warm welcome to all of you joining us for this edition of Arohana, our first in the new year 2021. So welcome back, everybody. And it's one of those days that you feel like returning to school after a winter break. So things aren't quite as spiffy as you'd like it to be. There's a little bit of slowness in the air and the environment all around. But we promise that today's session will be very exciting and we'll get you back into full groove ASAP. And so welcome once again to Nice Arohana. It remains for me to welcome our session speaker today, Sharda Agarwal, who's the founder, CEO of Sipalika. And so welcome, Sharda. Welcome to Nice Arohana.
Thank you, Sanjay. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year to you. Now, before we get into our discussion, I need to go through the housekeeping rules as always. And as always, there is a bit of a challenge at my end where this housekeeping, gosh, just a minute. Why doesn't it show up now? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we've got the housekeeping tips for everybody. All participants will be muted. You know what to do with regard to Q&A and questions that you might have, as if you're a returning participant. At the end, at the bottom of your screen, you see the Q&A box. Please post your questions there. They will get picked up and I will post them to Sharda for her to respond. If some questions of yours are not answered, don't worry. You can just drop an email to us at arohana@niceorg.in, or we will pick up those questions and have Sharda respond to them in due course. And as always, please do visit niceorg.in. You can catch our sessions live on Facebook as well, facebook.com/niceorg.in. We have the LinkedIn groups. The URL is out there. Do take a look at it and please join the LinkedIn group of Nice Arohana. And there is a YouTube channel that has got all the videos and very well curated. You can look for all of them. And the link is provided there at the bottom of the screen as well. And so that's the basic housekeeping tips. So do go through them and let's then move on to the session for today. And before that, there's one more announcement I need to make. Nice Arohana will be launching a business plan competition starting on the actually from today, by when applications will be open through till Jan 25th. Do visit our website and you'll get to know all the details about the business plan competition. It's open to those who are just at an idea stage and those who are generating revenues as well. Please take a look and send in your business plan ideas as per the details given on the webpage. There is a presentation deck available, the selection criteria, and there's wonderful prize money to be won. The finals will take place on the 26th and 27th of February in an online manner with eminent jury members who will evaluate the winners, consisting of investors. The jury consists of investors, industry experts, academics, and will evaluate winners in two categories, those at a very early stage and those at a growth stage. All details on the website. Kindly take a look and please participate and please spread the word around. So Sharda, thanks very much for being patient while we complete all the housekeeping announcements. And here is welcome once again to Sharda, who will be talking to us about building a healthcare business that she's the founder, CEO of Sipalika. So we'll get to know a bit more about Sharda, a bit more about her business, what makes it tick, why did she start it, and a bunch of other questions. And do keep your questions coming in, and you have the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Do send that in. And Sharda has got over 30 years of experience of working for large corporations, She's been an entrepreneur as well earlier, and with subsequently had a successful exit to a large global multinational corporation before she started Sapalika. So, so huge experience, enormous amount of understanding of consumers, marketing, business, and all of that. And I will now move on to the main session for today and talk to Sharda about what we will be doing right now. And so, Sharda, before I come back to you on this, gosh, just screwing up this thing. Just a minute. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So we're back. Okay. So Shraddha, you've been working with global multinationals like Johnson and Johnson, and then you were with Coke, and then you started off your own venture, and then that had a successful exit, and then you launched Sapalika, right? So talk to us a bit about that whole journey of yours. About 30 years now that you've been involved with, large companies, small companies, different kinds of businesses, and so on. And what finally got you to Sapalika?
I think I was truly lucky to work for two fabulous brands, both at and two fabulous brands and two companies with very, very distinct cultures.
Mhm.
Johnson and Johnson, largely in the baby and skincare space, and at that time, it was the market leader in every category it operated in. Now, when you're the market leader and your nearest competition is miles and miles behind you, so we had market shares in excess of 90% plus in the baby care segment, in the feminine hygiene segment, and in the wound care, where we were represented with Band-Aid as a brand. So when you're the market leader, it's like you're cruising. There
Yeah.
is really nobody. The challenge, therefore, for each of for us at that time was actually category expansion. So
Mhm.
it was not market share as much category expansion. Because even today, for example,
So Sharda, just a moment. When you use all these terms, category expansion and all of that,
I will
take a
explain.
moment,
I will
elaborate.
explain. Yeah, I know. So, so I'll take the example of the sanitary napkins category. Even today, 4 out of 10 women do not use a sanitary napkin in India.
Mhm.
And if you go to smaller towns or rural India, the numbers flip. You'll only find 3 out of 10 using sanitary napkins. And why is it so? Because the majority of them are actually using cloth. Women in India don't believe that culturally, even today, and it's sometimes hard to believe that it's worth spending time and money on yourself on things that cannot be seen by the external world. So
Right.
yes, cosmetics, yes, hair care, skin care, clothes, but certainly not on sanitary napkins. So the baby care segment was, as I said, we were the market leader, which means there was really no competition. But baby care at that point as a category was very small because most mothers or most parents used adult products like a Pond's talcum powder or a hammam soap or a Pear's soap on their baby. So our challenge was to get them to believe that baby skin was special, and therefore you needed to use special baby products. So I worked for Johnson and Johnson, as I said, where we were dominant in all the categories, where there was really no competition. So cruising along. And then 10 years of working there, and I moved to Coca-Cola, where it was like the culture for me, it was like a culture shock. It was like chalk and cheese because Coke was operating in the soft drink segment where it was a two-player market and two players going at each other. The person who hit the stores with their soft drinks at 7 a.m., the grocery store would be the one who would get a foothold in. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the product, you can't make much of a difference if I gave it to you in a blind taste. So where in that category, it was a brand and it was a brand imagery that drove choice. So you
Right.
associated yourself with a Pepsi, or you thought you were brand Coke, or if people were more macho, they associated themselves or identified themselves better with a brand Thumbs Up. So
Mhm.
extremely competitive, high decibel level advertising, very, very aggressive in the marketplace, which was direct contrast to the more genteel world that I was used to at Johnson & Johnson. So
Right.
Sanjay, what I think—
So the baby had to grow up.
Baby had to grow up, yeah.
Right.
So I think what my exposure in these two organizations gave me was very, very, as I said, very, very distinct cultures, very, very different stages of the evolution of the category in which we were playing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they taught me, and I think one of the biggest lessons I learned working as a multinational at these two multinationals was the importance of building a brand.
Right.
And which is what I carried through in my entrepreneurial journey as well, and which is what I think would be one of my key pieces of advice to budding entrepreneurs. Is at the end of the day, products can often be replicated very easily, but brands cannot.
Right.
Why? Because often brands are an emotional imprint in our mind, and it's very hard to change or displace or mimic that emotional imprint in the mind. So
right.
Both Johnson & Johnson and Coke taught me that, especially in a company like Coke, where we had Coke, Thumbs Up, Sprite, Maaza, Limca. At the end of the day, they're all soft drinks. I mean, it was one single category, but so many different brands. So the need for differentiating or creating very, very distinct brand identities was huge. So my big learning from both these
organizations— so Shweta, the takeaway is the category is soft drinks. Within that, you've got multiple brands. Each brand caters to a unique set of customers who identify with certain attributes of the brand, which is a very important thing for those building brands to think of, right? I mean, I've got a category in the nice cultural spaces, right? It could be, let's say, whether it's a food and beverage is a category, or beverage is a category. Within that, I need to be able to identify who my customer is uniquely enough, such that I create an appropriate brand identity that caters to the emotional need of that individual or set of individuals, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Even if you take, for example, let's take the two biggest e-commerce players, Flipkart and Amazon.
Right.
Although, they are largely in the similar categories, although we see a lot of high decibel advertising from them on promotions, on Diwali offers, on, their big festival days, etc.
Right.
There are a bunch of people who prefer Flipkart versus Amazon, and vice versa, another set preferring Amazon. Why? Because at a subliminal level, you are associating with those individual brands. You may not be able to articulate what it is, but there is something that makes you veer towards either of these two brands. And you, as therefore, or rather somebody who's a brand owner, who's building a brand, needs to be very conscious that building a brand is very important, even as you are establishing your product or your service.
Right. So understanding the consumer and developing that insight about that particular consumer is a very critical aspect of the brand building, right?
Correct. So one part is that. So understanding the consumer and identifying, let's say, a pain point or an insight into the consumer, which will help you position your product. But also there's an emotional piece that is attached to it. And that's again, you whether understand the consumer mindset, what are they going through, what's happening in the market, where are the trends, what are the, trending, what are the trends that are happening in society, in culture. All of that needs to go into building your brand.
Understand. So it's basically a holistic view about that particular segment and class of customers, right? Now, from there on, so you were in J&J dealing with baby care and baby products and stuff like that. And then you sort of entered the big bad world of soft drinks, aggressive American style marketing, brand building, and all of it. Then you dropped that and then you started your own business, right? And then, what made you what was that experience like? And then from there on, you started Sipalika, correct? So just help us straddle that journey alongside you.
So I started my first entrepreneurial venture, which was MarketGate Consulting in 2005. This was a time
15 years back.
Yeah. So this was a time when the word startup didn't exist in anybody's dictionary. So to us, we were just setting up our own business, the old-fashioned term of setting up a business. Why did I do that? My boss at that time, Shripad Nadkarni, and I quit Coke because we felt we wanted to be the McKinsey of the marketing world in India.
Got it.
We felt that there was no brand that was operating the consulting space. The consulting space tended to be more individual oriented. So that they're known by the individual name, the person who was running the show. Whereas we wanted to set up an organization and build a marketing consulting firm like the way McKinsey dominated strategy.
So you identified a need in the market, right? The need in the market, not there was a need for consulting, and the opportunity was to create a firm that was known for its advisory and consulting capability, as opposed to just a individual's capability, right? It was a competence of the firm.
That plus the fact that we wanted to be, see, what happens is there were a lot of consultants who began their career as consultants, whereas our differentiator was we were practitioners who've been on this side of the table, who've run the show, who've run businesses, who've built brands, solid brands and businesses, who are now going on to the other side. So when I come to advise you, I am not coming only with a consultant hat. I'm telling you, listen, I've done this before. So I'm coming from that experience. So a practitioner becoming a consultant, it was one big differentiator that we wanted to make, along with that, what you mentioned before earlier. So,
excellent.
So that was what it was. But then remember, this was a pre-VC, angel investor, all those, you know, private equity, none of that existed. So let's say the sexiness quotient didn't exist then. We just, our objective was to say, listen, and there was therefore nobody funding us, which means day one, you better start making money, or at least in an
These are all important points.
Yeah,
right?
it's important.
I mean, identifying a need, positioning yourself right, making sure that you earn money, you know, right off the bat, right?
Absolutely, because there was nobody going to give you money. So it meant that we put in our savings.
Right.
Also, imagine two people who were at Coca-Cola. So literally we had, I mean, to say the world at our doorsteps, that people called us for, you know, talks. We were known there, and now you are a nobody, because who's market-led consulting, right? The same individual, and I think this is one of the learnings, especially for people who are becoming entrepreneurs after working in the corporate world, is to know that you no longer have the backing of the brand behind you, the company that you worked for.
It's a very important point.
Yeah.
An extremely important point is because the social capital is lost. I mean, you know, and then when somebody does not return your phone call, when earlier they would return your phone call immediately, that it hurts your ego, right? So dealing with that is an issue, and all entrepreneurs have to handle that.
Absolutely.
And then you fly, you know, business class, stay in fancy hotels. Now you can't afford to, or you don't want to do it because of your business takes precedence, and therefore dealing with that is another issue, right? From an entrepreneur standpoint.
And as an entrepreneur, therefore, you are the brand.
Absolutely.
You are the brand.
Yeah.
So you are the brand. So you want to recruit somebody into your organization. And let me tell you, when we ran the consulting business, it wasn't so hard as when I'm running Sepalika. And I'll tell you why. The consulting business, you're making money from the first day. We were a very small firm, and we were, we were doing very high-end work. And the people that we recruited were MBAs from premier business schools. And a lot of them were our ex-colleagues, because that business that I moved into was adjacent to what I was already doing as a marketer.
Right.
But even then, as I said, that issue that you are the brand was critical, and therefore you could sell yourself. There was only this much I could use my Coke and my J&J credentials. Beyond that, they'll say, that's all very fine. You tell me what work you've done for your clients. Let's see what results.
And what can you do for me?
And therefore, what can you do for me? Absolutely.
Yeah. Got it. And then after that, then let's move to the Sepalika phase. Just help us understand, you know, why did you start Sepalika, and what made you start it? So I started Sepalika from a completely personal health experience that I went through. And I'm sure many people would have read it, that I used to suffer from debilitating migraines, which never went away. For almost 8 to 10 years, I had it, 16 hours in a day, 3 weeks in a month. My God. I had gone to the best of specialists in Mumbai.
experts in headaches, neurologists, orthopedists, GP, everybody. So they all gave me the same cocktail of medicines. And because I came from a J&J world, so I knew I had some background, so I knew what kind of medicines. It's all the same sort of generic one in different and given to you under different brand names. And nothing gave me relief. The number of headaches, the frequency, the intensity largely remained the same. And what's worse, I had the side effects of putting on weight, of being very drowsy, because many of these were muscle relaxants. So they made me feel pretty dull. And at that time, I was an avowed believer in allopathy. And then someone introduced.
And we are now talking what, 2015?
This was around 2012, 2013.
Okay, 12, 13. Okay, about 8 years
I was
back.
still running. This was probably the last year of MarketGate, when we had, so at MarketGate, we successfully sold off to the Publicis Group. And around that time is when I met my current co-founder at Sapalika, Mahesh Jayaraman. I was introduced saying that he's an alternate health practitioner. I never believed in alternate health. And the first thing he made me do was a blood test. And believe it, not one doctor that I'd been to had asked for a blood test at that time. And then,
really?
So, yeah, surprising fact number one, maybe today people do it. Now, fact number two, this guy tells me that in many people, a deficiency of two certain vitamins, which is D3 and B12, can trigger massive migraines. I'm like saying, really? I can't believe. I mean, I thought until then, vitamin was that, you remember, Sanjay, those black and orange, because we all had, right, at some point in time. So there are all those feel-good, nice medicines that every doctor prescribes when you have an antibiotic. So I said, I mean, I can't believe this. But then remember, I was at my wit's end. So I said, I'm willing to try this. So he put me on levels which are of these two supplements at levels which are what a group of doctors today, an entire new branch of medicine called functional medicine doctors, practice in the United States. Now functional medicine is getting more and more popular. Functional medicine is a branch of medicine where they believe that every individual needs to be treated from the root cause, understanding them as an individual, and therefore no two people get the same medicine. So you and I get a headache, we both can't get crocin. Why? Because Sanjay's headache may be coming from a liver disturbance, whereas Sharda's headache may be from a digestive issue. So how can you both be given crocin, which anyway only gives you, it's only stopping the pain. It's not addressing the core issue. So
it's a symptom.
Yeah. So very, very different doses of this vitamin level, therapeutic doses, which doctors I know even today, 99.9% don't do it in India. So he used that along with acupressure, which is the ancient Indian and Chinese system of balancing energies. So in 4 months, he fixed my migraine, which doctors couldn't do over 8 years.
My God, that's amazing.
And so then I said, okay, why don't you work with my, I got him to work with some of my family members, my husband, my daughter, some friends. And then I'm saying one day, Mahesh, I can't believe you are fixing serious health issues with vitamins and with acupressure. I mean, like, this is sort of unbelievable. And that's when I started reading more. And then I said, why can't more of the world know about this? And I said, would you be willing to join hands? And let's join hands to tell people that vitamins and minerals play such a crucial role in our body that a deficiency of these can actually lead to serious health issues. And then we started to realize it's even nutrition or diet, because it's what we put in, what makes all of us. And we don't know that. The moment we feel that, there is a cholesterol, the first thing is we want to run to the doctor, and we are happy when somebody gives us a statin drug. And the more unpronounceable the name, the happier we are, because we think it's very high tech. Not realizing that high cholesterol is coming from the way you're eating or your lifestyle. So that's when I said, let's set up Sapalika to do this. So we set up Sapalika initially, which is different from the Sapalika that we know today, purely as a content platform to make more people become aware that chronic health issues like heart conditions, diabetes, obesity, polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOD, asthma, all of these are all lifestyle triggered and therefore can be fixed or reversed with lifestyle solutions.
Right. And that led you to start Sapalika 1.0, right? I mean, as a content platform
Yes.
that would inform and educate people about what needed to be done.
Correct. And
Right.
it was not because Mahesh and Sharda were saying so. Each of the pieces of content that we put out was evidence-based. It's all out there. It's just that nobody tells you, one.
Right.
Two, it's not the pharma equivalent of double-blind placebo trials, RCTs. It's like, the kind of trials, the vaccine trials that are happening now. It's 25,000 people, 30,000 people. Now, if you're somebody who manufactures turmeric, where are you going to get the money to run these kind of trials? Unless there's money to be made, you're not going to do this, right? And therefore, for me to say that you're going to run nutrition research along by the same benchmark as what you do for pharma, where you can make billions and billions of dollars, doesn't make any sense. There's no economic sense in it. Anyway, so all the content that we put out was evidence-based. It's there. And as far as possible, we picked research that was done on humans to support the pieces that we were writing.
Right.
So for the first 2 years of Sepalika's existence, from 2016 to probably end of 2017, we were a content platform.
Got it. And then what made you change that approach, and what are you today?
Yeah. So this is, I think this is my big advice to people, and this is also learning that I had when I was one of my early entrepreneurial things. I thought at that point we said we would. A lot of the money would come through advertising revenue, not realizing that the kind of traffic that you need to build on a website to get advertising revenue needed to run into millions and millions. We were clocking about 500,000 per month in visitor traffic, which our VC at that point in time was fantastic for a serious content-based website based out of India. However, we needed traffic like 40 and 50 million because the click-through rates for ads is so low. And your revenue that you earn per click is like in minuscule cents, in decimal points, that you needed 40 million kind of traffic, 40, 50 million, which meant you need to generate that much of content.
Right.
And then that's when we sat back and realized, what is our DNA? What is the founder's DNA? So as an entrepreneur, my advice to entrepreneurs or people who are listening on to the show is to understand first, what is your DNA? What is it that you're most comfortable or you're good at? And pursue your business along those lines. And we said, we are not, and I'm not passing judgment here. There are organizations, there are healthcare websites which churn out 50 articles in a day, but that was not us. So we said—
So basically being true to your DNA and then delivering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's when we said, okay, our business model is going to be what my co-founder Mahesh was doing, which is his personal practice. So we would take his personal practice of working with people, with clients, online. So we started doing telemedicine in 2017, way before the way it's become so popular today. And we used technology to leverage, our, all that we had internally to be able to reach people across the country.
Okay. And now, so if somebody, so the shift that you did from a content play to actually now recommend or provide care to those having chronic pains, what was that shift like? How easy was it? What are the mistakes that were made? What did you learn from those mistakes?
Ironically, the shift was, one part of the shift was very easy. It was because Mahesh had the background in medicine. So we had to take that, we just had to, so there was no, in terms of medical expertise, we didn't have an issue. However, the other part, one of the other legs of our business was nutrition, right? We want to give nutritional advice. So here is my second, here is my another piece of advice to founders, which is that you need to have that functional expertise either as a founder or as you need to have that as a senior member of the team. So what I did, I went back to school. I went back to nutrition school. I went to the US to study nutrition for a year. Some of those classes we ran online. So I used to wake up at 4 a.m. to get on to something called Zoom at that point in time. I didn't know even what Zoom was. not a familiar word. I said, what is, I only knew Skype. But at 4 a.m., I used to attend classes because that was the US time I had to align myself with. And I studied nutrition and came back, and I'm now a qualified nutritional therapy practitioner, where we use nutrition and diet to heal a particular health condition. Okay, so I think the biggest challenge came in the fact that none of the co-founders here came from a technology background, and we were trying to do a consumer health tech business. Right. So while yes, we didn't at that stage want an app and very complex backend at our end, I'm sure that we would have benefited from a lot more technology involvement, which would have taken us faster, I think, to a lot of the business plan or milestones that we had set for ourselves.
So how now, just help us for the audience as well. Here are you who started off Sapalika, and so you've got functional expertise. Somebody's got experience in providing care to people and so on. How did you put the rest of the team together? Where did you find the technology person? Where did you find, let's say, the operations person to run the scheduling and all the rest of it that takes place? How did you put the rest of the team together?
If you go back to what I was saying, one of the biggest challenges of being an entrepreneur is that you are the brand, right? From a human resources or people perspective, you are the brand. And I can tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy because, you obviously want the best, but nobody wants to join you. Why would they leave a well-known brand and join Sapalika who they don't really know? So it's a bit of a fine balance. And also it's a well-known guys. I mean, if guys from well-known firms want to join you, they want to join you at pace that will completely, sort of burn your pocket, which we can't afford as an entrepreneur, as a startup organization. So it is a bit of a challenge. You have to keep trying and trying. And I'll admit that there are times when we didn't make the right choices. On today, my learning and therefore my advice is hire for attitude. Very often the skill can be learned on the job. And if you cannot initially, at least try and outsource.
What kind of attitude?
Sorry?
I said, what kind of attitude would you look for?
So it again, I would say the attitude depends upon the culture that you want in an organization. For us, for me specifically, I needed because we were very small and we were building the medical part of the business. I needed people who were self-starters. I needed somebody who had domain knowledge. As a startup, you often tend to work irregular hours. So you need to be able to be flexible. You need to be a self-starter. You need to be self-motivated, because very often what happens is I am not able to give you a work brief that is, tightly sewn. It's often evolving. So the brief tends to be often, so let's say I want to develop a website. The brief can be often very nebulous or very, very sketchy at the outset because you're not very sure what you want. As you go along, you realize, oh my God, I need this feature as well. Oh my God, why don't we have this? Why don't we link this to that? Those are not what you think of initially as an entrepreneur. So you need to have somebody who will help execute this constantly, evolving plans. It can't be something that's very watertight and that's very, very firm and very, very crystal clear at the outset. So those were the, attitudes I was looking for when I was hiring people.
Right. And, clearly putting a team together is one of the important things. And can you give some advice to people on how do you put a team together for a venture such as yours? In other words, while you say, yes, I look for a certain set of attitudes, what were the screw ups? What were the lessons learned? What kind of people would you want? Meaning, where did you go to find them? What were some of the things you looked for? I mean, everybody gives you a great answer if you ask them the question that most interviewers would ask. But how do you go beyond the answer to determine, does this person have the attitude? For example, do you do a reference check? I mean, how do you do that?
So one of the things that we did, and I think we did fairly, which we learned somewhere down the line, was we asked the person to come and work with us for a week. So this
Got it.
particular individual was outside, was not stationed in Mumbai. So we paid expenses for them. So yes, it was a cost that I incurred, but I felt it was worth investing. So I made them work, made this particular person work with us for a week. At the end of the week, we had him present to us what he thought were the, would be an ideal product that he wanted to create for Sipalika, where he saw the opportunities. And that was our way of evaluating, did he get the business, did he get a value add? And it's also, remember, let's also be fair to the other person. He or she needs to understand, is this a kind of organization that I want to work with? Is this the kind of business? So that we were in a serious healthcare business, we're now an online health clinic. Is this what I want to do? So I think that worked very well for us, getting somebody over and working with us on a trial basis. Now, this is, of course, a senior person. Now, for more junior people, what I have been doing is beyond the interview. So we do multiple rounds of interviews so that we don't bias each other. Initially, we were both doing the interview because we said, let's just save time. So we do multiple rounds of interviews so that each of us don't bias the other. And then we sort of are able to give different perspectives of what we gleaned from the interview, which the other person possibly didn't catch on. One of the other things that I've also learned for more junior folks is to actually give assignments and to evaluate those assignments and see, therefore, have they got the brand. One of the things that I find is that at some point there has to be an inherent interest in health. At least that seems to work for me, although I will not say it that it's a hard and fast rule. But I find when somebody has an inherent interest in health or in a belief in what we are doing,
right,
I sort of it's easier for them to settle down and start running and contributing to the team.
Right. So you want people who at least are sympathetic to the sector. They believe in the approach that the company takes, and obviously the skills and attitude and competencies, etc., are, let's assume, given. But these are some of the additional areas that you want to check.
Absolutely. Because remember, it's as a startup, we are a very small organization, and therefore the culture of the organization is supremely critical. It can actually make or break.
Yeah.
Very often you have ideas. It's not as if you're going to be making monies. So you want the team to believe in you and you want them to run with it. So the culture is important. Therefore, the individuals fit to the organization is important.
Absolutely. I think it's an excellent point. I think which is a great takeaway for everybody, that, like the old saying, right? Culture eats strategy every time, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very important point you made. Now, sort of shifting gears a bit, moving from, the team building and, your hiring and all of that. And this is a sort of a new avatar of Sipalika healthcare platform and all of that. What are your learnings so far from having run this platform in its current form, Sipalika, platform? What are the learnings you have from the sector, healthcare, and two, this internet-based, tele-consulting, telemedicine kind of business? What are the sort of quick 2-3 abstract points that people can work with?
The first thing is we've sort of narrowed ourselves to becoming a women's hormone health clinic.
Got it.
Why? Because I believe that when you're very sharply focused as a business proposition, is where you are able to be a lot more successful than trying to be everything to everybody.
So focus is critical.
Focus is critical. So therefore, we are now only an online women's hormone health clinic. And that's what we're going to be. As we go further, we may even choose to further super specialize, but that's something that will evolve. So for the moment, it's a women's hormone health clinic. And my learning has been that one of the biggest things, I think, stumbling blocks that we had was this whole concept of telemedicine. People will say, how are you telling me you're going to treat me? You're not going to see me. You're just going to be speaking to me. There is no physical clinic. I don't know you as a brand. How would I even know that you're going to give me results? So for us in healthcare, especially, and if you're a new player, Unlike fashion, unlike food, unlike travel, where you don't mind trying brands, here, trust and credibility is so critical. And as an entrepreneur, the lead nurturing the funnel is wide and it's really long, which means that you need to reach out to a huge number of people as leads before you can find them converting. And the whole conversion process, when I say the funnel is really long, it takes a long time for them to finally believe.
How did you do that?
So one of the things is always, so our strength has always been medicine, our credibility, our knowledge that we have built over time. And something that we're doing very unusual, right? So we had this whole concept of Sepalika called the 5 petals. So Sepalika is the Sri Lankan name for the Parijat flower.
Oh, okay.
And we picked that name because it has antiviral and antimicrobial properties. So our idea is that...
And Parijat was taken.
And Sepalika sounded very nice. So that's why I picked it. Is to say that there is, healing with the power of nature. Now, we use what we call as a 5-petal approach, which is quite unusual in what we do because nobody else does it. So you find a lot of nutritionists doing work. So we do not just nutrition, we go beyond that. We're doing acupressure, we're doing vitamins and minerals, we're doing lifestyle, and we're doing Ayurveda. So somebody who's combining, I know it sounds cliched as it sounds, the precision diagnosis of the Western world, which is using blood test parameters and analysis, and with solutions that come from Ayurveda, from nature, from food, which probably is more inherent to India. Combining the two is what we are doing. Now, for someone to believe that I can reverse your diabetes, and the person saying, listen, I have been to the best endocrinologist. I've been on, metformin or whatever is the diabetes, glucophage or whatever is the diabetes medication for so many years. And you're telling me you're going to be able to reverse it. It's incredulous, right? So for us, that's a big challenge. A, to believe that online medicine can work. B, to believe that it can be, you can fix a disease not through allopathy, but actually using lifestyle, food, Ayurveda, acupressure, and lifestyle. And C, from a brand that they don't know. So those are, to me, were big challenges. And one of the things that we have learned over the years, and I think this is one of what I would call as an IP or something that's very unique to us, is that 50% of our success actually comes from behavior change. And we've learned how to build in behavior change into a particular patient's or a client's user journey when they come to us. And this is not just for, I think, for Sepalika or healthcare. Anybody in any business, you need to build in behavior change. So the program that you see running at Sepalika today is vastly different from what you saw in 2017. And it keeps evolving. But a lot of it is coming. So it's not easy to replicate the model because a lot of it is just understanding when to intervene, when to pull back. Because remember, you're just talking to them on the phone. And a lot of it is we're asking them to change their lifestyle 180 degrees.
Got it.
Huge amount of compliance is required.
Got it. Okay. So, we're at 4:45. Shraddha, there's some questions that have been coming in. I want to jump to the audience questions so we do justice to their queries. First one is from Mamta Jain, who says, what exactly are the ingredients or actions required to build a brand? Clearly it's not just a logo or the name, but what would you do to build the brand? And is building the brand equal to building a business?
So one of the things that we taught and a model that we created when I was in the consulting business is the mistakes that companies often do. They start with the business. And one of the things they do is to build a brand, and that is hived off to the marketing team. And usually in companies, brand building is equal to advertising. For us, that's not so. For me, and I believe that brand is the core of everything that you do. Okay. Let's hark back to, let me pick an example, back to an airline industry, not a brand that we'll all be sort of admire today, but it did some great work at that point in time, because I'd like to establish this difference. If you take Kingfisher and Jet at the time that they were there, Jet was a very, very, professional airline. Look at it. So when they defined the brand as a professional airline, the definition, everything, whether it is from your advertising, whether it is in the way the crew was dressed, the colors that were being used, the way they spoke to you, the way call center answered your queries was very, very professional and often clinical, because that was what Jet defined itself. Kingfisher, on the other hand, when it came, decided, obviously coming from the founder's persona, but Kingfisher said, we are going to be all about style and class. And obviously he was hugely inspired by Virgin Atlantic. And from therefore the choice, of course, the red came with it, but the way it was all about extravagance. And I'm not talking about the business class alone. And even in the economy class, I remember they offered you a choice of food, and very, very different kind of food. The air hostess actually, instead of the hair being tightly tied up, the hair was let down, right? So because it's about the brand that you create. To answer, therefore, her question is to say that for every business, you start with a brand, and the brand in turn determines what's your selling strategy, what's your distribution strategy going to be, what's your organization structure and culture going to be, what's your advertising going to be, what's your promotional program going to be. So the definition of the brand sits at the core. And by definition of a brand, it means what's the brand personality, what are the brand values, what are the things that the brand cannot do and can do, what are the areas it can enter and cannot enter. That's a core definition that you do for the brand. So there is an emotional piece to it, there is a functional part to it, but there's also a cultural part to the brand. So you define the brand first and you define the business elements later. Most businesses do the ulta. They think brand is only for advertising, and that's not so.
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction, that advertising is not branding. Branding is the core essence and the value proposition of what you're offering, right? Whether it's a physical product or a service. Moving on, question again, this is a question from Vinay Prashant. He says, I've been wondering if it's easy to move from a physical product offering to a service offering, right? How do the brand elements carry through?
Within the same business, I'm presuming he's asking it's within the same business, right?
Or yeah, it's not clear, but let's say because you were selling products before, right? Now you're kind of selling service.
So my biggest challenge, at least I've seen in India, is service marketing is far harder. People are less willing to pay for a service. It's far easier to pay for a product. Right. So I find that in my consulting business, where the client was willing to pay 1 crore to make an ad, because at the end of the day, you got a physical ad. When I told them, can you pay me 20 lakhs to tell you the strategy, get you the right strategy to make the ad? Oh, that's very expensive. So it's harder to pay for a service or an intangible compared to paying for a product. But it's not that it's not possible. You have to build the service brand just the same way that you will build the product brand. So so it's the same functional, emotional, cultural, all of which still holds even in a service brand. It's like, take banking, life insurance, they're all services.
Right, understand. So basically a holistic understanding and then sort of crafting the proposition to deliver that. Question from Akhil, who asked Akhil Rakshar Rapu, who says, how to build a culture first brand when you have no experience? I'm starting right out of college.
So this is the toughest bit, right? Especially when you don't have any experience. But I would say to build a culture, you're literally defining, okay, how do I want it to be? Is it formal? Is it that the boss decides and then everybody follows? Is it that what kind of timings do you want to keep in the organizations? What level of, let's say, autonomy will you give team members in decision making? How are you going to solve interpersonal issues that happen in an organization? So if you decide all of this, how much of fun are you going to build in? Are you going to be all serious about work? Or is it that you can be fun, crack jokes, and still be serious? So these are the things that go to determine the culture. Culture often evolves, and there will always be, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but never be dissuaded by it. I would suggest that as someone who's just starting off, you need to be very cognizant, be very conscious. Just as you're conscious of building your business, or your product, you're looking at revenue, be conscious that you're also building simultaneously a culture. And I think if you take the eye off that, if you're not conscious of that, then you fail to build a culture.
Agreed. And culture to match your DNA.
Yeah.
Right. So then a question coming from Chintan Bhatia, which is an important question, I think. is how did you go about funding and then investment approach? If you could throw some light, what would you say is the approach to raising money, funds, etc.?
I'm glad, Chintan, you asked this question because I have huge learnings on this front. When we started Sepalika, we got seed funding from, I would believe, is one of the finest or the nicest venture capitalists in India called Axel Partners, based out of Bangalore. And really, really nice set of folks out there who gave us seed funding. One of the things that we realized, and I didn't realize then, and this is my learning now, and I want to share it with everybody, is remember going back to DNA. What is it? Who are you? What is it you want to have? What is it that you want to build? What's your ambition level? And that should determine where should your source of funding come from. Is this there are multiple sources of funding: family your own money, family members, friends, angel investors, banks or financial institutions, VCs. But remember, each of these guys have their own set of requirements. They have their own set of answerability to their investors in turn. So when an angel investor gives you money, they may be more hands-on, but they're not going to ask you, where is your, 10,000, when are you going to hit the 10,000 client mark? When are you going to get the $1 million? When are you going to get the $100 million? Whereas a VC is going to push you for those kind of multiples because that's the space that they operate in. Now, this was something I didn't realize when I initially took seed funding. And subsequently, my learning was that I needed to move Sepalika at a far slower pace. And because remember, we're trying to build a serious health business. We're trying to build a business that's almost like pioneering. Not many people, it doesn't exist. This model doesn't exist. And therefore, it's critical for you to set your own benchmark. Don't go by what you read in the papers. Oh, this one got, $2 million in funding. So-and-so, this VC funded this business. They're in Series F, Series H, Series D. Forget all of it. Look at understand what each of these sources of funds mean. Understand what they will look for, or understand what they will hold you accountable for. It's fair because they're running a business like the way you're running it. So they are answerable too. So understand the implications before you seek seed funding from whoever you are seeking monies from. That's my big learning.
No, excellent. I think that's great. So now that we're almost at the end of time, my last question to you, Sharda, is right now you said, Sepalika is focused on women's hormonal treatments, and you're a woman entrepreneur. A large percentage of our audience is women. What is your advice, if any, for women entrepreneurs? Is there anything different than what you would say to, a male entrepreneur?
If you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said, no, gender doesn't matter. But today I'm, more gray hairs, wiser now to say, yes, women entrepreneurs. One of the things I realized is that women are actually, swimming against the tide, the tide of what has been set through hundreds and hundreds of years of culture, societal evolution, etc. We're not getting into that bit here. But because you're swimming against the tide, you have to work a lot harder. Some of it is also doesn't come very intuitively to us. For example, networking doesn't come very easily to us the way it comes, I feel, to male entrepreneurs. So you have to work a lot harder. And I believe that one of the two, I've hugely benefited from my networking. So we have the it's a women's community of 7,000 women. That's the community I'm a part of. And it's incredible the amount of help that you get from the network. So whether it's whether it's a community like this, whether it's your own college, alma mater, whether it's a professional network that you do via LinkedIn, whatever be it, for women entrepreneurs, my big advice to you is to network. The second advice is women often suffer from the imposter syndrome. We feel that we never deserve our accolades. We feel, we usually tend to attribute it to luck. Oh, but it's a team effort. That's the first thing we always say, it's team effort, never taking individual credit. And often because we don't, we suffer from that. How can it be so? How did I get into the IM? How did I manage to get funding? How did I manage to get the business to this level? So we need to overcome that imposter syndrome, for which I think tremendous self-belief is necessary. That's my second thing. And third piece, which is not just to women, but both to men and women, anybody who's starting off, is remember, you are your best salesperson. When I talk about Sepalika, I will have so many people who look at me, even friends who look at me in disbelief, because they don't believe that I can say that I can reverse diabetes. If I sort of fall prey to that, I'm gone. I will never be able to get that passion.
Belief is important.
Self-belief and the fact that you are your best salesperson. No one else is going to do it for you.
Absolutely.
So it's important to do that.
Excellent. I think, that's a great way to unfortunately end this session, Sharda. We're sadly out of time. And thanks so much for all the insights, the learnings, and sharing of your experiences. It's been, I'm sure, very, very valuable to all our audience members. So thank you very much. Thanks for making the time, and thanks for coming on this Arohana session. Thank you.